Yeah, if you could. Yeah, well, Margaret's doing it. Good afternoon, Mr. Greer. Could I just remind you about what I said about the level of speaking? We're keen to hear what you have to say, and it's very easy just to get into a conversational style of speaking. I mean, all witnesses have the same problem, but if you could maybe just speak a bit louder and bear in mind that the people in the back of the room who are keen to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Brody. If we could just perhaps pick up from where we left off before lunch and look to volume 13, bundle 2 at page 538. Volume 13, bundle 2, page 538. This is an email from Kelly Bain of Mott MacDonald's to Darren Pike and others. There's a range of people copied in, including yourself. Volume 13, bundle 2, page 538.
Bundle 13.
13.
Thanks very much, Carol. Thank you.
We see your colleagues saying, hi all, the board have noted the number of air changes within the en-suites is higher than that required under SHTM. And then if we look to the final sentence in the paragraph, can project code please confirm the above, and if a derogation needs to be submitted for the board's approval. You see that?
Yes.
In the context whereby the only design responsibility that NHS Lothian is taking on your analysis is for operational functionality, why do we see comments coming from Mott MacDonald to Project Company and Multiplex about compliance with SHTMs?
So Kelly has issued this, but Kelly's part of the project management team. So there's likely a number of emails behind this email, a combination potentially of the Mott MacDonald team and the NHS Lothian team. So Kelly would be issuing this on behalf of the broader team.
Okay. And commenting upon compliance with published guidance, including SHTMs?
Yes, yeah.
And then if we look on at bundle 13, volume 1 this time, please.
I think that email's a precursor to that derogation WW14 that comes through in July. So.
And if you just explain to the inquiry, what's WW14?
WW14, it was a derogation issued by Project Co in July 16, which I think related to the extract rates for single-bedded rooms. So it's the extract rates in en-suites and single-bedded rooms.
Okay. And is that an agreement by NHS Lothian to derogate from the published guidance?
No, it was Project Co were submitting a derogation with the potential to derogate from published guidance.
And was that something that was agreed to?
No.
Why not?
At that stage, it was under review. So I think the first thing, there was a process point that derogations didn't apply to the NPD contract. So it had to be done either via Project Co change or some other contractual means. So there was a process point first. And then there was a lengthy discussion about whether Lothian were willing to accept an increased extract from the ensuite and a reduced air change rate for the overall bedroom.
And do you recollect what was the outcome of those discussions?
Ultimately, it was included in item 13 of the 81 list that was in the settlement agreement.
Okay, we'll come on and look at that when we come to the settlement agreement, but you think that email that we've just looked at is a precursor to what ends up as item 13 in the technical schedule?
Yes.
Thank you. If we could look on this time to bundle 13, volume 1 at page 7. This is an email from your colleague Camille Kowajacek to Ken Hall of Multiplex, stating the board have reviewed the environmental matrix and still has significant concerns on items that do not appear to comply with the BCRs. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, whenever your colleague is referring to the board having reviewed the environmental matrix, are we talking about a detailed technical audit, or are we talking about the analysis you've talked about, this sampling approach?
It would be that, yeah, it wouldn't be a detailed technical audit, it would be more sample approach.
Okay. And even on that light touch sampling approach, your colleague had identified what he refers to as significant concerns in relation to non-compliance with the board's construction requirements. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
Can you just try and explain in general terms? We're now, contract signed in 2015, we're now in October 2016, and there's significant concerns. What are relations like between the parties at this point in time?
I think at this point in time the relations were still okay. Just trying to think. I think there was, I'm trying to remember if it was December. Was it December 16 or December 15 that pile 133 failed? So at that point, I think we were still working well with Project Co. It was more as the commercial pressure increased. It felt like the pressure on the teams increased as well. I can't remember exactly, but pile 133 failed. So I can't remember the date of it, but that resulted in significant delays to the construction. I think it probably was December 15 that happened, and then I think it was probably July 16. Duns had gone into administration, which meant the concrete frame wasn't able to be completed. So the site, so there was a number of weeks delay as a result of those two instances. I think that generally increased the pressure on the teams.
So at this point in October 2016, what was your understanding of the significant concerns that had been identified?
So I think this would have been revision 7 of the environmental matrix at this time. I think there was. So just I say I wasn't as close to the detail of the actual issues, but in terms of just what's in the email. So board has highlighted cells in blue and red bubble in the HARC. So that would have been items they'd identified. There was also the production group drawings were ongoing, so that's the clinical updates of the 1 to 200s and the 1 to 50s. So when that process was happening, there was then the environmental matrix would have to loop back round and make sure that they've reflected the outputs from the production groups. Doesn't reflect clinical light, so yeah, there was quite a few lux, I think, points 3 and 5 are lux level, I think, like lighting issues and then ventilation issues as well. So looks like there was a broad range of generic issues with the matrix at that point.
So if we just think about that broad range of issues that are being identified, including point 6, some ventilation rates don't appear to comply with BCRs. Would NHSL still comfortable just to proceed with this light touch sampling approach that you've talked about from Mott MacDonald?
At that stage, yes. I say back to the point where we increased the scope was more from a construction site inspection type approach as opposed to the actual design reviews. So we carried on. There was kind of an organic growth in the matrix because items were getting resubmitted. Then we were looking at them a number of times. So there was an organic review, but it was always done in the context of the risk allocation. I think again, Lothian with the pile 133 and with Duns, I think we're very conscious not to be seen to be delaying works on site when on the basis of the risk allocation in the contract.
You obviously at this time worked in the private sector for Mott MacDonald. You now work in the public sector for NHS Lothian. If you were working on a public-private finance hospital and you'd got to a point whereby very significant concerns had been identified, including with ventilation rates, if you were in the client side, would you not want a more detailed technical audit to be undertaken of the solutions being put forward by the project company?
I think there's probably a broader, in terms of PFI, NPD, I think we really do need to look more broadly about whether that's an appropriate contract for healthcare going forward, because it does limit the, if you're employing somebody to design, build, finance and maintain something for you, you are in theory passing over a lot of the risk, apart from the operational functionality risk, to the private sector. And I think there's a given ultimately contractually you can hand over the risk, practically a lot of the risk ultimately still sits back with NHS Lothian. So I think in that I would say I think we need to review whether we're using NPD contracts or similar going forward as a general principle.
So much more complicated than a straightforward design and build contract whereby you know exactly where the risks and liabilities sit.
Even again, I know. I think everything needs to be on the table going forward. I think even design and build, you're still handing over a lot of the risk to the private sector. So it's not as complex as a NPD, but a lot of the principles still apply.
Maybe come on and discuss this more later. But just given that it's been raised. You're raising NPD revenue-funded contracts and the problems they create. Do you think, in terms of the project for the RHCYP, part of the problem comes from the very deal structure and contract itself?
Yeah, that there's limited things the board can do to actually change the design. So once the requirements are set and the board construction requirements are set, they can comment through the review procedure, but ultimately, Project Co could proceed. I understand my understanding of the review procedures. Project Co could proceed anyway without at their own risk, without taking on board the board's comments. So you are effectively handing over to the private sector to design, build, finance, and maintain that building for 25 years.
So if I'm understanding you, effectively a loss of control for the health board in that type of contract.
Yes.
Theoretical transfer of risk all onto project company. But that might be identified quite late in the day if they simply get on and build various things.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's fair enough, yeah.
So is it fair to say then, if we just kind of work through those stages, really, if you're looking at it from the health board's point of view, if you're in a revenue-funded project, an NPD type contract, there's theoretical transfer of the risk, but if you ultimately have the responsibility for providing the healthcare, you might find out very late in the day that you've got a facility that doesn't comply with relevant guidance or similar issues.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think back when the NPD contracts were all getting formed, I don't think the industry had the same level of issues. Sort of from a healthcare delivery perspective, it wasn't as prevalent in the industry. I think it's more recently become more common. So obviously Glasgow, Edinburgh projects. There's a number of other projects around just now that are having similar issues as to what we've experienced.
Can you just give some general examples? I'm not asking for specifics, but you say, because one thing the inquiry and the chair might be interested in is, are these completely isolated project-specific issues that crop up on the RHCYP, or are these actually wider systemic issues that are going to crop up on future projects? So I'd be interested in your views on that.
Yeah, so I mean, locally, I don't know the details of Baird and Anchor, but there's been some obviously high-profile media attention in terms of the challenges that projects. Again, there's a brilliant project team on there that I used to work with and from NHS Graeme, but they've got challenges there with the projects. Look at Dublin Children's Hospital, that obviously different country, but I think it was started off at £1 billion. I think it's now over 2 billion in terms of where that's sitting. Again, that's just from what I've read in the media. I think there was Mid-Met and Royal Liverpool down south. I think they experienced significant challenges And so that it does feel like it's more systemic in terms of.
And when you're talking about these significant challenges, can we just tease out what do you mean by that?
Again, I don't know the detail. It's really what I've read in the media in terms of the delays experienced in these projects, and I think that was sort of the Mid-Met Royal. I think that was Carillion who were on there who went into administration. So there's probably a few themes coming out there in terms of the commercial pressures on these projects.
And is that largely arising in your view because of the fact that you've ceded control, you've signed a contract, and it's a separate project company that's ultimately going to build and initially be responsible for the hospital?
I think it probably needs a broader review than that. I think that it could be one of the reasons, but I think there's probably a broader review needs undertaken on the delivery models going forward.
So if there was to be that broader review, what would you envisage it including?
I think we need to review all the options. So I guess the two big procurement models in Scotland just now are it used to be the NPD form of contract, which was SFT. That was kind of 2011, 2012. But more recently, it's I think all the recent projects have gone through the HFS framework with a principal supply chain partner. So that's generally NEC3, NEC4 type contracts. And I think we need to consider is that the right model, or are there other options we need to look at?
Okay, thank you. If we perhaps just return to Bundle 13, Volume 1, and if we just move on to page 8, please. And it's really just a bit about the regards, Camille, where it states, whilst the board has noted general and specific comments above, the board reminds Project Co that unless the board has already accepted a derogation, it is Project Co's obligation to comply with the BCRs/SHTMs, etc. And the board not commenting does not remove that obligation on Project Co. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, is this standard reminder that gets sent across to Project Co, effectively saying we are commenting on this, but the design risk still sits with the project company?
Yes.
If I could ask you to look on within Bundle 13, Volume 1 to page 21, please. So this is an email from Brian Rutherford of Wallace Whittle, 9th of February 2017, to a range of individuals. You see that Camille Kawajczyk and Colin McRae of Mott MacDonald are copied into that. It says, further to our ventilation workshop on Monday, please find enclosed a copy of our multi-bedrooms ventilation amendment proposal to achieve room balance, proposed solution to rooms identified as being of concern. As agreed, we've also enclosed a set of A3 general arrangement layout drawings to be used as key plans overmarked to show specific room locations. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look through that, we'll see a series of drawings. So that the first drawing has got spaces marked out with red lines going to A, B and C at page 22. And then page 23, we've got E and F, or D, E and F. And then 24, we've got G, H, I, J, K and L. Do you see that?
Yes.
So is that effectively Wallace Whittle TUV Sud telling a couple of your colleagues from the technical department exactly where these rooms A through to L sit within the hospital?
Yes.
And again, if we just look down onto page 25, we just take as an example D and E. Those are room codes for B1063 and B1031. Inquiries heard evidence that the B1 code means that a space is sitting in critical care. I appreciate that you might not know the technical details of that, but would it be fair to, just looking over this email and the plans, that your colleagues within the technical department, particularly Mr McRae, had it pointed out with a big red line showing them where the rooms in dispute were within the hospital?
Yes, thanks.
If we could look on to Bundle 13, Volume 1 to page 51, please. So this is a communication from your colleague Camille Kowajczyk to a range of people. You're copied in as one of the recipients. And we're at the 5th of June 2017. And if we could just scroll down to the main body of the text. Begins stating, David, as previously described under MMGC 002408, the board does not believe these updates to the environmental conditions constitutes a board change. Without these updates, PECO's design was not compliant with BCRs and relevant guidance, and also from a patient safety perspective was not acceptable to the board. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, if we just think back to the evidence you've given, which is the only design responsibility on NHS Lothian is for operational functionality, are we quite far removed from operational functionality in terms of the communication being sent by your colleague in this email?
Yeah, so I think this email was a response. So back to the February 17 meeting we were just looking at, I think there was a compromise agreement reached there, whereby 14 of the 20 multi-bedded rooms, 14 of those were deemed essential to be negative or balanced. And I think this ACONEX is a reply. So with February 17, we thought a compromise agreement had been reached, and then the project progressed, and then in May 17, David Martin from Project Co issued an email saying effectively that Project Co were not proceeding with the compromise and that a board change was required. And the reasons for that were that the board had signed off the environmental matrix at level A or level B through, I think it was probably level B, through the review procedure. And there was then the other point that David made was, so that I think it was two points related to the review procedure which they'd met, and one of them might have been reference design. And then the point 3 that David made was that Project Co felt the 20 multi-bedded rooms were general wards. So yes, so this is Camille responding to David's request for a board change.
And what Camille's saying back is we're not prepared to agree to that because it wouldn't be safe for patients.
Yes.
If we look at the final paragraph there beginning, additionally the board notes.
Yes.
Additionally, the board notes that PECO used wrong design criteria for the multi-bed rooms. As explained by the board at the meeting on Monday 23 January, a ward constitutes the total bed complement of a designated area. Multi-bed rooms are much smaller sections within a ward that allow patients to be nursed as a small group. Within children's services, these areas are important for the purposes of clinical safety, as they allow a cohorting of patients who require enhanced levels of nursing observation/support, either because they have the same type of infection or are at a similar stages of acute post-operative recovery. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, saying we need the cohorting of patients, and this is a patient safety issue.
Yep.
Then if we look over the page onto page 52, final paragraph of Camille's email, please note that table A1 is a summary extract from the activity database ADB, and as stated in the SHTM, PECO should refer to the full ADB sheets for further details relating to multi-bed rooms. Please find attached for your information the design criteria for multi-bed areas. Do you see that?
Yep.
So would it be fair to say that this email being sent by your colleague Camille Kowajczyk, that is setting out a very clear position in terms of compliance with published guidance, including SHTMs?
Yes.
And is this part of the ad hoc advice that we talked about previously? Is this ad hoc advice being given by Malt MacDonald to NHS Lothian in terms of compliance with published guidance?
Yes, yeah, say so.
We don't see any mention within that email of the spaces in question being in critical care, do we?
No.
Why not?
My understanding of the 20 multi-bedded rooms is that they were all classified as that. They were all classified as 20 normal bedded rooms. So all the conversations, thinking back to July 16 when the single bed derogation was submitted, that was 6 air changes to 4 air changes. And then the conversation then developed to Project Co's position was these were 20 rooms were all general wards. And then the NHS Lothian Mott's position was these were all effectively normal bedrooms, all normal multi-bedded rooms.
Did anyone from Mott MacDonald check whether any of these 20 bedrooms in dispute were within critical care?
No, I think it was known. I think it was known they were in critical care because I wasn't in the February meeting, but that would have formed part of that assessment of selecting the 14 rooms. But I think from my perspective, all I heard in the discussions was 6 air changes to 4 air changes. Latterly, after the event, I've queried that, and I looked at the room data sheets for the multi-bedded rooms in critical care, and I compared it against the template ADB sheets. So the template ADB sheets have the template ADB sheet for a multi-bedded room. So the one that was used for the project was B1609, and that has the template sheet has clearly obvious critical care type activities. So things like patients on life support, as an example. The clinical activities for the room data sheets for these rooms had been changed to normal bedroom activities. So there was a conscious change to make these normal bedrooms. So again, I think that supported these were all dealt with as normal bedrooms, and the whole way through the 20 multi-bedded rooms were always classified as normal bedrooms. So it's a fit, and some of these were in a critical care department.
So at this point in time, did you know some of these rooms were in critical care?
I didn't know. Okay. I wasn't involved in the detailed conversations.
Would your colleague Colin McRae, would he have known that those rooms were in critical
yes,
care?
Yes. Okay. So I think Camille, in that February 17 meeting, I think it was Camille there from a project management perspective and Colin there from a technical perspective.
Okay, so Mott MacDonald know that some of these rooms are in critical care, but they're still treating them as a general ward. They're not making the link to say these rooms are in critical care, so they need a different specialised ventilation arrangement.
Yeah, I don't recall any conversations to that effect.
Is that quite a significant issue in terms of what we see happening? Is this a missed opportunity quite early on to spot that issue on the part of Mott MacDonald?
I think if we think back to the environmental, I think if the room function had been classified as an HDU area or a critical care area, and the clinical activities had been those of a critical care department, so they weren't having light refreshments, and then I think there would have been a better chance of the Mott MacDonald team picking it up. I think in the circumstances that were given, obviously they'd think, well, it's difficult to get into the head of a mechanical engineer, but I think I would imagine they were looking at it as these are classified as normal bedrooms. I guess the other thing I'm just reflecting is bidder C back in the procurement phase. So bidder C were the bidders that did make a change to environmental matrix, but they didn't change all the rooms. They changed some of the rooms were changed in critical care. So they've made an interpretation about what they felt constituted the enhanced air change rate. And yeah, I think there's been various interpretations. I understand that.
So your understanding, and presumably you had a lot of time to reflect on this and discuss matters with colleagues, it wouldn't be as simple as saying to someone like Colin McRae, that room's in critical care, and that would be a light bulb moment to say, that means 10 air changes per hour and positive pressure. That's kind of beyond my technical understanding there, but I think it's something that could have been asked for sure. It's definitely something that could have, but in the circumstances where it's all presented as a normal bedroom and the clinical activities are those of a normal bedroom, then yeah, I can maybe understand why they didn't. So does it come to, if someone had told Mott MacDonald, these rooms are HDU rooms, Mott MacDonald would then have known that needs specialist ventilation and it needs 10 air changes per hour and it needs positive pressure?
I think if the room function had been HDU and the clinical activities in the room had been critical care activities, yeah, I think that would have all stacked up. I think the old SHTM that was applicable at the time wasn't, as the new SHTM has been updated. And I think it's a lot more specific about how we classify critical care areas in terms of the level of patient in the room. So I think there's less chance of that happening now. But I think in the old SHTM, it was a more of a generic response. The other thing is, if back to that clause 2.60, if we had, so it's hypothetical in some ways, but if we had looked at it and used clause 2.60 for B1609, which is the template ADB sheet, that template ADB sheet has 6 air changes as the air change requirement. So the guidance, I think, could have been clearer, I think.
So difficulties, even if you get the ADB sheet itself isn't having 10 air changes per hour and positive pressure.
The actual template one, that was B1609, which the project code team selected, but they could have selected B1610, which is also a critical care multi-bedded room, and that's got 10 air changes, but the one that was selected was B1609.
But at this point in time, you knew some of these rooms were in critical care, albeit it's not your job to know the exact technicalities. Is that right?
I'm not sure I did at the time. I would have been copied in some emails that probably had critical care in it, so yeah, but it wasn't something I was conscious of at the time.
Do you know if your colleague Colin McRae knew that these rooms were in critical care?
Yes, I think he was in that February 17 meeting that chose the 14 of the 20 to be essential, so yeah, I would assume Colin did know.
Because again, as a layperson, I appreciate you're not commenting as a building services engineer, but if you're identifying what rooms are essential for a particular set of ventilation parameters, it stands to reason surely that you need to know exactly what the clinical activity is going to be in that space.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Colin looked at the room data sheets and then saw that they were normal bedroom activities, but I don't know if that was part of the review or not.
Again, just stand back from all of this in your role as the project manager, should the inquiry understand there's a developing picture here that you had SHTM 2025 that doesn't have any particular guidance in terms of ventilation parameters. You've got SHTM 0301 2014 that does, within Table A, contradictory information provided in the room data sheets. It seems quite a chaotic picture in terms of the guidance at this period during the project.
Yeah, I think the guidance, and I think the new guidance is better. I think we are. It's one of the things I would say that if with the pause in capital projects just now, I think that's definitely an area we need to look at in terms of trying to refine the guidance so that when we do re-engage capital projects, that there's a clearer rules of engagement, clearer briefing documents. There's still a number of the conversations to have just now is that it's some parts of the SHTMs, HPNs, SHPNs are mandatory. Some parts aren't, but none of that's written down anywhere. It's all based on interpretation and experience as to what's mandatory and what's indicative, what's guidelines. So I think that's definitely something I think we should be focusing on over the next couple of years to improve that briefing.
From your perspective, and again, drawing in your experience in the private sector and the public sector, rather than having guidance which may or may not need to be followed, would it be simpler if there was just a set legal standard that had to be complied with, like you would have in things like the technical handbook to the building regulations?
Yeah, I think that's probably where we need to head to. I say that, and we need to make that a distinguishing factor between what's guidance and what is mandatory.
Because then you wouldn't be talking about whether something's guidance, whether you should or shouldn't follow it. There would be a set legal standard that has to be complied with, or non-compliance justified.
Yeah, the contract attempted to do that via the hierarchy of standards, and it made all recommendations, guidance mandatory. But then that's a huge onus on the private sector, and it's a difficult process to follow through.
Thank you. If I could ask you just to move on, and if we could look this time to Bundle 13, Volume 8, at page 449. It's really to the email at the bottom there from Janice McKenzie to Jackie Sansbury and Brian Curry, copying in a number of people, including Kelly Bain, Camille Kalojacek, and yourself, Graeme Greer. And it says, "Dear both, please find the clinical risk assessment in relation to the above as requested, which Dorothy, Fiona and I have pulled together." Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you're obviously copied into this email. I'm sure you're copied into thousands of emails over the course of the time you were working with Mott MacDonald. But do you remember getting this email that attaches the clinical risk assessment?
As you say, there was a lot going on at this point, but yeah, so I've obviously seen the email at some point, yeah.
And in terms of the people that are copied into it from Mott MacDonald, it's yourself, Camille and Kelly, and you've said that in terms of Mott MacDonald, that's, if you like, the project management side, as
Yes.
opposed to the granular technical individuals like Colin McRae.
Yes, yes.
And then just in the main paragraph, it says, "The issues only really affects children's services, but we've discussed with Hester. We consulted with children's CMT representatives this morning, Fiona Mitchell, Eddie Doyle, Linda Cowie, Peter Campbell and Sharon Russell, and the risk assessment fully reflects their views. They are clear, as we also are, that we cannot have a new facility that does not give us the option of cohorting patients with airborne infections. We've suggested an overall compromise position of only some of the 4-bedded rooms in the facility having the ventilation changed. In summary, all in PARU and medical inpatients, and one of the 4-bedded areas within critical care." Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, if there had been any doubt in your mind, you'd presumably accept that at least at this point, Mott MacDonald have been told that some of these rooms are going to be in critical care.
Yes.
And it continues, "However, the children's CMT did say that to achieve this, there would be a delay to programme. Then they questioned whether we should not be changing all of the 4-bedded rooms to allow for future proofing and flexibility." Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
If we look on just a couple of pages down, we get to page 451. This is a record of the general risk assessments that were completed. You're obviously on the project management side. Would you then provide a copy of this to someone else within Mott MacDonald, or does that sit with the project management team?
Yeah, it's something we could have done. So it would more likely been the project like Camille or Kelly that would have passed it on as the lines of communication. But I'm not sure if we did. I can't remember if that was something that was passed on. I guess by this point, so again back to February 17. I guess in my mind at this point, February 17 was where all the decisions were made. Where the 14 rooms were selected, 14 of the 20 multi-bedded rooms were selected as being essential. The board changed, so the request for the board change then came in May 15, and then this was all part of an escalation process. And for, I think McRoberts would have been involved by now, and potentially starting to escalate up to principals in Lothian. So I think that was probably part of pulling documents together to brief the exec on where things were going.
And it's 7 years ago, and you fairly say, I can't remember if this got passed on to other people, but I'd be interested in reviews. Looking back, in an ideal world within Mott MacDonald, who should have got this record of general risk assessment?
I'm not sure. I'm also not sure it would have made any difference if we had passed it on, because I suspect they would have still looked at this in the context these were normal bedrooms, even though within a critical care department, but classified as normal bedrooms. So, I mean, it might have helped if it was passed on, but I'm not sure if it was or not.
But again, just so I'm understanding, is your evidence that even if this document had gone to Colin McRae, who's got a responsibility for ventilation within Mott MacDonald, you're not sure that a generalised risk assessment that said some of these rooms are in critical care would necessarily make him think that means that we need to stop talking about balancing negative pressure and we need to move to positive pressure and 10 air changes per hour?
Yeah, I think, again, I wasn't involved in the February, but I'm kind of assuming that all those discussions took place in that February meeting where the 14 rooms were selected. So I'm not... I would have thought any issues would have been raised at that point as opposed to necessarily a follow-up. For me, this was just kind of documenting the decision making. The bit I wasn't sure, but in Janice's email, that mentioned one room in critical care. I'd always thought there was 4 rooms in critical care, so I wasn't as close to detail, so I'm not sure how we went from 4 to 1 and then back to 4.
The whole timeline is slightly confusing because the key and essential rooms, that discussion takes place before in the timeline we're looking at the risk assessment. Is that right?
Yeah.
Again, just from a project management perspective and drawing on your experience now working within the NHS, would you expect the decisions on key and essential rooms to be made and then a risk assessment to be done, or a risk assessment to be done and then a decision made on key and essential rooms?
Yeah, it could have been another way, but I think there was probably a collaborative discussion with the project code team back in February, and this was a bit. I suspect it was a test to see if everyone was still committed. I think this was then passed on to IPC for review. It's passed on to the clinical departments, the actual clinical teams. So I think it was just a test to see if they agreed with the initial assessment on the 14.
Because I won't take you through the whole of the document. The inquiry's looked at it on a number of occasions, but if we just look on page 451 down to the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that the third box at the very bottom says RHCYP, critical care, 1-bedded room, B1063, ventilation change. Do you see that?
Yes.
So if there was any doubt that some of the rooms were within critical care, it's set out within this document. You see that?
I say my understanding, I don't think there was any doubt there was rooms in critical care, but I say I wasn't close to the detail. I just know that in order to make that 14-bedroom assessment, they must have known which rooms were in, which rooms were where.
And then if we look on to page 455, again, that's just really the subject of assessment, consider task environment. Just above that, it says the department's RHSC and DCN reprovision project, RHCYP, critical care, B1. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
So again, certainly at this point in time, clear statement from NHS Lothian that at least one of these rooms is going to be within critical care, but you think fairly that discussion probably took place previously on the basis that you couldn't work out what was an essential room unless you'd worked out what the clinical function was going to be within
Yes.
it. And again, obviously you can't speak for Mr McRae, but your understanding is that he's not at that point identifying just because these rooms are within critical care that absolutely meant positive pressure and 10 air changes per hour.
Yeah, that it's difficult to put my head in the mechanical engineer, but that seems reasonable, yes.
If we could go to Bundle 13, Volume 5, please. And page 1226. Actually, if we start at page 1216, please. So Bundle 13, Volume 5, page 1216. This is a design issues report dated the 7th of July 2017. And if we look on to page 1218, you see that the documents dated the 7th of July 2017. The originator is Camille K. Is that Camille Kowajczyk, your colleague?
Yes.
The checkers are W. Stevenson, so is that William Stevenson? And then Colin McRae?
Yeah, that's right.
And you're the approver?
Yes.
So what were you doing in terms of an approval role? Is that just because you're the line manager for Mr. Stevenson and Mr. McRae?
Yeah, not the line manager, but yeah, in terms of the project, I was the project manager, and therefore my role here was to make sure that we had appropriate governance on the document before it was issued.
Okay. And again, you've told us quite clearly, both in your statements and in your evidence, that there's no design responsibility being undertaken by Malt MacDonald. Why are Malt MacDonald then producing a design issues report if they don't have any responsibility for design?
I think this was requested. There was one of those ad hoc requests from Brian to say, can you provide a report that was I think there was 3 issues in this report. There was a high voltage supply issue, there was an MRI issue, and ventilation, I think, was the 3rd issue for it.
And if we look to the ventilation issue, if we look down to page 1225, just to the very bottom, paragraph 2.2.1. So page 1225. At the bottom, paragraph 2.2.1. States the board believes Project Co's design for ventilation within both single and multi-bed rooms is non-compliant with SHTM guidance and the ADB database requirements with regards to both air change rates and pressure regimes. Do you see that?
Yes.
Then if we look down onto the next page, page 1226, towards the bottom, it's the final paragraph under 2.2.2.2, multi-bed rooms with ensuite. There's a paragraph, as explained by the board at the meeting on 23 January 2017, a ward constitutes the total bed complement of its designated area. Multi-bed rooms are much smaller sections within a ward that allow patients to be nursed as a small group. Within children's services, these areas are important for the purposes of clinical safety as they allow cohorting of patients who require enhanced level of nursing observation stroke support, either because they have the same type of infection or are at similar stages of acute post-operative recovery. Additionally, these rooms aid the normal socialisation and development of young children. Similarly, within DCN, multi-bed rooms within the ward are used to cohort patients requiring enhanced levels of nursing stroke monitoring that is more difficult to achieve within single-room environment. Do you see that?
Yes.
And as I understand it, in this report, it's still being treated that the pressure regime should be balanced or negative rather than positive. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And why is it the case, given that within this paragraph, it's recorded that for these spaces, there's going to be this enhanced level of nursing, and given the fact that the general risk assessment relating to critical care has already been provided to Maltmydon, why don't we see any discussion about critical care areas within this paragraph?
I think because they'd all been classified as normal bedrooms, and the clinical activities in the critical care rooms were those of normal bedrooms.
Okay, so again, is it back to, it's been locked down that these rooms, it's absolutely essential for them to have balanced and negative, and is that not really revisited at later stages in the project?
No, I think February 17 seems to be where the decision, the 14 rooms was taken, and yeah, it wasn't. I don't believe it was revisited at all until IOM did the actual validation.
And then if we look over the page onto page 1227, the paragraph just above 2.2.3, Project Co has designed the multi-bed rooms to supply 4 air changes per hour with an extraction within the ensuite of 10 air changes per hour, thus resulting in a positive pressure regime. The ADB sheet for a multi-bed room, 4 beds, states a minimum air change of 6 air changes per hour and a balanced or negative pressure. Therefore, Project Co's design does not comply with the requirements recorded within the activity database. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, 6 down to 4, balanced and negative versus positive, given that this is simply being treated as a general ward.
Yes, general bedroom, sorry.
A general bedroom, apologies. And then if you read on, the summary states the fundamental concern to the board is that in continuing with Project Co's proposed non-compliant design, there is a risk of the spread of bacterial airborne infections into corridors and surrounding patient rooms. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then the next paragraph, 4 lines up from the bottom, without these updates, Project Co's design is not compliant with BCRs and relevant guidance. Therefore, any costs associated with redesign are Project Co's responsibility. Furthermore, Project Co should submit a Project Co change for deviation from relevant guidance. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, advice from Maltmydon in relation to whether or not there's going to be compliance with published guidance.
Yes.
If I can ask you to look on Bundle 13, Volume 5, please, to page 1243. So the first email is from Janice McKenzie to Dorothy Hanley, copying yourself in. It says, "Thanks, Dorothy, I've made a few minor changes." And then we see reference to the document below that in an email from Dorothy Hanley to Janice McKenzie, again copying you in. And it says, "My comments, an addition of rationale column for Janice's addition stroke amendments." Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, if we look down onto page 1244, you see a Mott MacDonald document on page 1224
Yes.
called RHSC and DCN multi-bedroom, 4 beds ventilation extracts from IHSL environmental matrix. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, if just think back to the advice of Mott MacDonald, operational functionality sits with NHSL, no other design responsibility taken over by the board. Why are Mott MacDonald making up this document that's got a whole raft of technical parameters for the ventilation system?
So I think a few things on this. So I guess the key for me is in the kind of disclaimer. It was I think this was a project management document. I don't think the technical team presented this, and I think the initial reason was to issue it to David Rawlinson as part of his independent review. So I think it was originally produced back in about October 17, and I think there's the grid's missing just to the left of WWXXXDC, the Rev 10 RHSC. I think there's hidden cells there, and the original document had all the environmental matrix presented. So say back for David Rawlinson, I think the environmental matrix were shared with him, and then I think it was McRoberts asked could we produce a summary of Project Co's environmental matrix, and which we did. And I think we were flagging on the bigger version. We were flagging the changes that Project Co had made to their design on each iteration of it for the 20 multi-bedded rooms. And then this, I think it was just convenient for the purposes of, I think this would have been February 18. February 18, when probably in advance of there was a principals meeting at the Sheraton on mid-February, and I think this was probably preparation for that meeting, saying what was the compromise position back in 24th of February 17, and I think there was then, like, if we could, is there any further compromise that could be made by the board in advance of those discussions with Project Co? So it was really setting out, and then there was the rationale was added to why a further compromise might be able to be made.
Because if we look down the Mott MacDonald document, the left-hand side's department, and the second main boxes we've got B1. The second main box would be B1, and it's PICU and HDU's 24 beds. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So again, I picked you up earlier as saying, really, if Mott MacDonald had just known that these were high dependency unit rooms, that they might then have realised that whenever you look to table A1 of SHTM 0301, it should be 10 air changes per hour and positive pressure. But we don't see that within this table, do we?
It's I didn't do the review myself, but I'm assuming the team looked at the room function, which is multi-bed ward, in terms of certainly when in the room function sheet back in the environmental matrix, the draft environmental matrix, there was a room function sheet, and in that there was a row for HDU. That when Project Code took the first iteration on, that HDU row was deleted. That's what I was thinking. If that row had been there and it had been HDU in that room function, it seemed to be like I don't know how the original spreadsheet works, but it could have been a drop down where you selected HDU and auto populated the rows beyond that. Maybe, but so I think if that was populated with HDU in terms of that room function, that probably would have generated the cells beyond that.
But at the minute, again, just because the space is in HDU, Malton McDonald aren't making the connection that should have 10 air changes per hour and positive pressure.
Yeah, see, I'm not sure. This original intention was to summarise all versions of the matrix to David Rawlinson, and then I'm not sure if this was shared with the technical team. My recollection is this was a project management function for the principals meeting in February.
Thank you. And in terms of the principals meeting that takes place, I think you'd said earlier, you were there.
Yes.
In terms of the Malton McDonald side, who else was present at the principals meeting?
I'm not sure. I think I'd imagine Camille and myself. I think Colin was potentially in the Malton McDonald office just round the corner. So, but remember, certainly Kelly and Colin coming across at some points for the meeting. It probably depend on which topic was getting discussed.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask you to look to bundle 10, please, and to page 112. So the document we're looking at is effectively a timeline that was created much later in the project, where it lists a number of events. And one of them you see just approximately just over halfway down the page, on page 112, it is an entry that's called Mott's Peer Review of Settlement Agreement. You see that Mott's Review of Settlement Agreement, 29th August 2018, B. Curry and Mott Mac. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you have any recollection of what was being discussed at that Mott's Peer Review of Settlement Agreement meeting?
Yes, so the peer review, that was a regular meeting for the Malton McDonald directors to meet with Brian and Ian. So Ian Graeme, Director of Capital Planning, Brian Curry, Project Director. So it was the Malton McDonald's directors met. So it wasn't generally called peer review of settlement agreement. There was a regular, maybe quarterly meeting, maybe 6 monthly, where the Malton McDonald directors, so generally being Richard Peace, Richard Cantley, met with Brian and Ian just to discuss any issues of escalation from a project team perspective, or any project issues that needed escalated away from the project team delivery side of things. I think this one, I think there was a chap called Ridian Morgan. He came from a contractor background, and I think we felt it was useful for Ridian, Richard to meet Brian and Ian, just to really get Ridian's perspective on how things were going at this point, from his contractor background.
And was it a review of the settlement agreement that was being discussed in terms of the commercials, the technical issues, or a bit of everything? I
think it was probably a general status of the project and the settlement agreement. I think it just happened this one was on. It was more broadly speaking, it was a general review of the project, and it's just this. It was settlement agreement. So I don't think they discussed the detail of the settlement agreement.
And just in terms of the timing, you've told us about the meeting that takes place at the Sheraton. And there is an agreement that's reached later within 2018. But there was also the proposed litigation, is that right? Is that possibly taking place after the meeting at the Sheraton?
Yes, so the meeting at the Sheraton, the parties couldn't reach agreement on a few matters, the big one being the multi-bedded room issue. And shortly after that, then it escalated to legal proceedings.
And at that point, NHS Lothian, they've got court documents drafted up, is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. It would be shortly after the Sheraton meeting. That would have been instigated, yes.
But formal court documentation drafted up, is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
And you provided a draft affidavit, didn't you?
Yes.
And what did you cover in your draft affidavit for the potential litigation?
The 20 multi-bedded rooms. So 20 multi-bedded rooms, using the ADB sheet, clause 2.60, and the 6-year changes negative or balanced.
And at this point, NHSL's position and Mott MacDonald's position is that those rooms need to be balanced or negative pressure.
Yes.
Right? And IHSL and Multiplex are saying no, they don't. They need to be positive pressure.
They were just saying it was a general ward, so they said it needed to be 6-year changes, but they were providing 4. And but I don't think they committed to a pressure regime. I think they just said the general ward was silent on pressure regime.
And presumably reasonable to assume that if NHSL is at the point of litigating that its proposal in terms of this must be balanced with negative pressure, that's been subject to a detailed review.
Yes.
And is that a detailed review with the assistance of Mott MacDonald?
Yes.
The litigation doesn't take place because there is an agreement reached at some point during 2018, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you told us in your evidence just before lunch that at this point you were really getting quite concerned because of the overall risk profile of the project, is that correct?
If it would have been probably about June 18, probably when I saw the first iteration of the the 81 list, and the other technical schedule. So I think that had drafting at the top, or it was potentially in meetings with IHSL, where I think one of the words was used that the board had to confirm all board construction requirements had been met. Yeah, so that for me felt like a significant shift from the project agreement risk allocation.
Again, you're not a lawyer and nobody's asking you for a legal opinion, but commercially, did that have an alarm bell ringing for you?
Yes.
And just again, you're sitting with your Mott MacDonald hat on at this point. What were your concerns from a Mott MacDonald perspective about this potential shift in design risk?
I think it was more than I was with the Mott MacDonald hat, but it was also just from a project team perspective that I didn't think we were in a position to take that design risk, and so yes, we weren't geared up for that in terms of the way we were reviewing documents.
Because in terms of the ad hoc advice that you've been giving, including on compliance with technical documents such as SHTM 0301, did you see a risk that suddenly actually Mott MacDonald takes on all the design risk for this project?
Yes.
And did you raise that with NHSL?
Yes.
Okay. If I could just ask you to have in front of you, please, Bundle 13, Volume 5, page 1272. So Bundle 13, Volume 5, page 1272. Which should be an email from yourself to Brian Curry dated the 4th of June 2018. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you begin by saying, Brian, Brian, further to your emails below, a few additional thoughts from last Thursday meeting with IHSL. We skip the next paragraph. The third paragraph states, I think the intentions from IHSL were constructive. We all just wanted to close the technical issues. And I think we are all agreed that all items are to be defined with precision. However, the comment about the BCRs is concerning. As you have described in your email, in effect, we had thought the process would conclude in the board removing any further objections to the design solutions proposed and recorded via one of the mechanisms already established in the contract. The risk allocation set out in clause 12 of the PA is clear, and I am concerned that if the board agreed to write the above BCR statements, it could significantly alter the PA risk allocation in IHSL's favour. Furthermore, I don't think the board is in a position to fully confirm compliance with the BCRs. The burden of responsibility should always remain with Project Co. As we are not the designers, Mott MacDonald would not be in a position to provide that design assurance to NHSL. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we just skip to the penultimate paragraph, you conclude by saying, hopefully our understanding of this could be clarified with a quick discussion with the legal team 4:30 today, particularly how the settlement agreement interacts with the PA ? or is it possible that we have misinterpreted some of the subtlety of IHSL statements during the meeting? Question mark. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that effectively the email that you were alluding to in our earlier discussion this morning about concerns that you had, and particularly a concern that you didn't think Mott MacDonald could go from doing a light touch technical review to suddenly taking on full design responsibility for the solutions being proposed in Settlement Agreement 1?
Yeah, that this is one of a few emails I sent on this matter, and I said Mott MacDonald could have taken the design responsibility, but it would have meant a full shift to actually doing the design, and the way the contract's set up, that would have been very difficult to try and implement.
And again, is this one of the issues that you talked about earlier in terms of some of the difficulties that are created in terms of these types of NPD projects, whereby if you've ceded control, suddenly it's then quite difficult in terms of any possible changes that might crop up within the structure?
Yes, it's quite a rigid structure of contract. And given the funding elements to it, the implications of changing that structure are quite significant.
Were you aware of whether there was a letter of comfort issued by IHSL in advance of Settlement Agreement 1 being signed in relation to whether their design solution complied with published guidance?
I think I was, yes. Yeah.
Is that something that you'd have discussed with the project team, including Brian Curry?
Likely, yes. There was a lot of letters around at that point, and I think that was if it's the one I'm thinking of, it was in response to a request from HFS or NSS, and I think Lothian wrote a letter, but also IHSL wrote a letter, I think.
Okay, so just to check, we're talking about the same letter. If we could look to bundle 4, please, and page 9. Which is a letter to Brian Curry dated the 31st of January 2019. And then if we look on to page 10, see at the bottom it's signed by Wallace Weir, the project co-representative. The bold heading, all critical ventilation systems inspected and maintained in line with Scottish Health Technical Memorandum 0301, ventilation for healthcare premises. Construction, all ventilation systems have been designed, installed and commissioned in line with SHTM 0301 as required. Systems are maintained in such a manner which allows handover at actual completion to meet SHTM 0301 standards. Operations, all critical ventilation systems will be inspected and maintained in line with Scottish Health Technical Memoranda 0301, ventilation for healthcare premises. Do you see that?
Yes.
So you've obviously seen that subsequently, but in 2019, before the settlement agreement is signed, do you remember seeing this letter and or discussing it with Brian Curry?
It wasn't the one I was thinking of, to be honest, no. But yeah, I don't actually remember seeing this at the time, I don't think. But I may have done. So I don't remember any detail on it.
I want to move on now and just ask you some questions about Settlement Agreement 1. I think you've made your position quite clear, just so I make sure I'm understanding it. You accept that Mott MacDonald are involved in helping to draft the technical schedule that goes into Settlement Agreement 1, including providing some general advice.
Yes.
But your position is, as per the email we've just looked at, you were perfectly clear with NHSL that Mott MacDonald weren't taking design responsibility, and on your analysis, NHSL were quite happy with that position. Is that right?
Yeah, so there was subsequent to the email I sent to Brian. Brian then escalated it within NHS Lothian, and there was responses to that, which I think at that point the responses were, we're not going to alter the risk allocation, it's going to stay as it was. But then subsequent to that, the technical scheduling came out and it seemed to have similar, it wasn't the same drafting, but I think it had similar concerns, and I raised the concerns again that it seemed to have kind of effectively reverted back to Lothian taking responsibility for it.
And what was the final position as you understood it from Brian Curry and NHSL?
I say that there was an email I drafted to send to Brian. I didn't send it to Brian directly, I sent it internally. I discussed it with Brian, and that's where when we got when I saw the revised technical schedule, discussed that with Brian and said, look, we've got offers of additional services here to try and, so it says that's back to the three options I mentioned earlier, where we said, look, we could carry on with the speedy RDD review basically as we are and do our best. We could do an enhanced review, or we could take the design on ourselves. But at that point, Brian, I'm not sure if Brian discussed it internally, but I think at that point there was the commercial pressures were such, and the assurances from Project Co were such that the NHS Lothian didn't feel a need to do that.
So in terms of the options that you gave Mr Curry, which option did he come back and say he wanted to take?
It was option A, which is just carry on and do our best with the speedy RDD.
Okay. But recognising that Malt MacDonald weren't taking overall design responsibility for the technical schedule set out within settlement agreement?
Yes.
Thank you. So if I could just, I think this might be an area where recollections differ. If I could ask you to look to Mr Ronald Henderson's statement, so his witness statements in volume 3 of the witness statements, and if we could look to page 288, please. So what Mr Henderson says in his statement at paragraph 22 is MML, Malt MacDonald, IHSL and MPX Multiplex drafted the agreed resolutions to the disputes over ventilation in 4-bed and single rooms that are found in the SA1 technical schedule. Then if we look on to paragraph 27 over the page on page 289, he says, we relied on advice from Malt MacDonald in relation to the agreed resolutions. That seems to be a very different recollection to your one, Mr Greer. Is Mr Henderson mistaken?
I don't think Ronnie was involved in all the conversations I had with Brian. So I'm not sure if he was copied into the email I sent to Brian or whether that was escalated. It was generally, it would be Brian, myself, McRoberts would have been involved in kind of the more scope aspects of the conference, but Brian managed the Malt MacDonald scope as opposed to Ronnie.
Okay. And I took Janice McKenzie, who was the project clinical director, to those passages in Mr Henderson's statement, and she said that she agreed with that. Again, is she mistaken whenever she said that NHSL relied on advice from Malt MacDonald in relation to the agreed resolutions?
Yeah, I would say so. We worked very closely with the NHS Lothian project team, and we did. I think I would say we gave a lot of comfort to them in terms of the advice we were giving. But it was back to that point, we couldn't actually give that design assurance that was needed for the settlement agreement. So that's maybe from their perspective, I can understand why they've said it, because we were giving them a lot of comfort and we were giving them a lot of advice. But there was a lot of, so the 81 list. There was fire issues, there was ventilation issues, there was infection control issues, but there was a variety. Some of them were more clinical based as well. So it really was a collaborative effort to try and get that 81 list to the point where it got into the SA, and that included McRoberts in that as well. They were involved in the drafting.
So in terms of those perhaps high level discussions in terms of what exactly are Malt MacDonald doing, what level of responsibility are they taking, that's a discussion that's effectively taking place between yourself, Brian Curry, and sometimes with McRoberts, the legal advisors being involved as well.
I think there would have been others copied into that email as well, sent that Brian then forwarded on. I can't remember who exactly, but I don't think Ronnie or Janice would have been involved in that. But they might have, sorry, I can't remember who was copied in.
Thank you. I'd like to move on and just ask you a few questions, Mr Greer, about the settlement agreement itself. So that can be found within Bundle 4. It starts at page 11. So Bundle 4, page 11. So if we come out of the witness statements and go into Bundle 4, page 11. So this is the settlement agreement and supplemental agreement relating to the project agreement for the provision of RHSC and DCN at Little France. Do you see that?
Yes.
So is that effectively what we've been referring to as the settlement agreement or settlement agreement 1?
Yes.
If we could look on to page 42, please. You see that there's item 7 there with the dispute being the 4-bed ventilation. And it begins by stating, in relation to ventilation pressure regimes, the board believes project company's design for the 4-bed ventilation is non-compliant with the board's construction requirements. And it then goes on to list SHTM guidance as well. Look to the 4th paragraph, it says, from a clinical perspective, the principal concern to the board in continuing with Project Co's proposed pressure regime design means that there is an unacceptable risk of the spread of bacterial airborne infections into corridors and surrounding patient rooms positive to the corridor. The board requires the pressure regime to be balanced or negative. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look to the right-hand column, we see a description of the agreed resolution, which states the reviewable design data noted below for this item has been given status level B in accordance with Schedule Part 8 review procedure. The resolution of the dispute submitted by Project Co through the Schedule Part 8 review procedure and agreed by the board is for 14 number 4 bedrooms to be balanced or negative to the corridor at 4 air changes per hour. The remaining 6 number 4 bed wards remaining as per the environmental matrix. And then there's a listed series of drawings. So effectively the resolution is balanced negative pressure 4 air changes per hour. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Then if we look down, it begins on page 45, item 13 at the bottom. It is called single bedroom ventilation air changes. And then just slightly over the page, onto page 46, we've got the detail of that dispute. In relation to ventilation air change rates, the board believes Project Co's design for the single bed ventilation is non-compliant with the board's construction requirements, BCRs, Project Co proposals, SHTM guidance, and also non-compliant with comments made by the board on the environmental matrix in the reviewable design data schedule at financial close. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, in addition to the multi-bedrooms, there's also a dispute about ventilation requirements in certain single bedrooms. Is that right?
Yes, so this goes back to the WW15 derogation. So, and this, I think in terms of that description of agreed resolution in the appendix, it was effectively a Project Co change that was included as the evidence of that. So yes, it went that, I say, straight from July 16 right through to item 13. That was consistent.
Okay. And we see the resolution just at the bottom of page 45, over onto page 46. It says the board stroke Project Co agree this item is closed and the agreed technical solution approved through Schedule Part A review procedure and agreed by the board and Project Co as resolving the dispute is as set out in Disputed Work Schedule Appendix 1, Item 13. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, can you just explain in your own words, how was this, the single bedroom ventilation issue, how was that practically resolved?
I think it was reducing, so the SHTM 0301 for a single bedroom required 6 air changes, negative or balanced, and the agreed resolution on this one was 6 air changes to 4 air changes, negative or balanced, with an increased extract to create that negative balanced pressure regime.
And if we think to critical care rooms, which in Table A1 would have 10 air changes per hour, was your understanding in relation to Item 13, was it any derogation from 10 down to 4 as opposed to 6 down to 4?
No, all the discussions I recall were 6 to 4.
Okay, thank you. So if we could move on and then discuss the IOM limited testing. When does that come onto your radar in terms of the testing that's done by IOM?
It was fairly late. I think the settlement agreement was signed around February 19, and there was a quieter spell in March when we were just proceeding towards opening and working through the issues, and then I think it was probably about April or so, I think Ronnie had asked if we knew of anyone who could do an independent validation. So I think we checked around it, but I think ultimately we ended up with IOM. So I don't know the exact dates, but it was probably around about April or so when that was instigated.
And in terms of the testing, was that testing against a contractual standard, or was it going to be testing against published guidance SHTM 0301? That query came up later on because so IOM were instructed to do the validation. I think Ronnie had some leave to take, and Colin, because he knew his way around the building, kind of showed IOM where the various rooms were. And in terms of whether it was published guidance, there was a query came in about should we be testing. There was from my perspective, a query came in about there's some of the multi-bedded rooms are coming at four air changes. I was saying that's okay. That's in Item 7 of the settlement agreement. There's 14 of the 20 rooms are in a settlement agreement dedicated down. So I think I sent an email to Janice saying should we say to them now there's been a derogation, or let them do the report and then correct it via the derogation that's in the settlement agreement. But whenever you're talking about a derogation, presumably Item 13 is a derogation, it's an agreed derogation, but in terms of Item 7, was that a derogation at all?
So I was just, apologies, terminology probably wasn't quite right there. It was the agreed resolution. For me, the impact was the same. It was, I think the difference between the two is I think Project Co acknowledged they were non-compliant with. Sorry, maybe they didn't. But I think there was more of an exception that they were willing to submit a Project Co change for Item 13. I think there was more recognised that they weren't compliant with 0301, whereas Item 7, I don't think they ever accepted that. There was much more. Their position was the 20 rooms were general ward, so there was more of a dispute in Item 7 than Item 13.
But for Item 7, was it not McDonald's understanding at the time that's drafted that it met fully SHTM 0301 as opposed to being a derogation that was lower than SHTM 0301?
No, because it was 6 air changes to 4 air changes.
So it's going from 6 air changes to 4 air changes?
Yes, yeah. And that 6 air changes to 4 air changes, we produced a residual risk register. And the residual risk register, so we queried are Lothian comfortable with the reduced air quality 6 to 4 in the basis both the single bedroom and the normal bedrooms were 6 air changes to 4 air changes, and the response was yeah, they were happy with the increased volatile organic compound, basically the reduced air quality for going from 6 air changes to 4 air changes, and that's recorded in this residual risk register.
So Mott MacDonald's understanding was always it's derogating, but from 6 down to 4, as opposed to 10 down to 4.
Yes. Yeah.
Could we just look then, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 9 at page 259?
So I don't know if this is so that's my understanding. I'm not sure. I've obviously not been with Mott MacDonald for a while, so I'm not sure what their position is.
So Bundle 13, Volume 9, page 259. Which is the IOM report, Witnessing of Theatre Rebalancing and Validation Summary Report. And if we could look down to page 263, please, at the bottom. And to the final paragraph, high dependency areas. So what the IOM report says, testing of the high dependency areas identified that the air change rates and pressure cascades did not meet the requirements. In early discussion with the health boards and then over the page, technical advisors, Mott MacDonald, we were advised that there was derogation in place which reduced the requirements from 10 air changes to 4. Do you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
Why would someone from Mott MacDonald be saying there was a derogation from 10 down to 4?
I'm not sure. That all the conversations I was ever involved in was 6 air changes to 4 air changes.
Because the inquiry's heard some evidence already to indicate that Colin McRae was telling IOM there's a derogation from 10 down to 4. Do you ever remember having any discussions with Mr McRae about that?
No, no, not at all. The whole way through from July 16 right the way through to June, July 19 was 6 air changes to 4 air changes.
Thank you. And then if we just continue on page 264, it says the test information was summarised in an initial briefing to the health board during week commencing 2nd July. It later transpired that there was some confusion on the detail of the derogation and the construction supply chain, and the health board began working on both an interim solution to improve the solution and a longer term permanent solution. And then we see the final results for the high dependency areas were as follows, and then it continues down. So if that type of statement was made to IOM, certainly in your understanding, it would have been a mistake.
In terms of, sorry,
In terms of a derogation agreed by the health board from 10 down to 4.
Yeah, there was never 10 to 4, it was always 6 to 4.
Were you surprised whenever the IOM reports came back and they were saying there was non-compliance issues?
Yes, I was very surprised.
And again, is that because Mott MacDonald weren't viewing the technical guidance in the same way and interpreting it in the same way as IOM were?
I'm not sure if it was an interpretation. I think it's back to the room function and the clinical activities planned for those rooms. Certainly, I see all the discussions we had was that these were normal bedrooms and the clinical activities were those of a normal bedroom. So it came as a complete surprise. I think as well, just the fact it wasn't like this was just a quick discussion. This was discussed from July 16 extensively through to, well, probably mainly. Yeah, it was discussed in part through to probably the settlement agreement. So for over a period of 2 years or so, this issue was getting discussed, and it was always getting discussed in the context of it's a general ward for the 20 rooms or it's a normal multi-bedded room. And I don't recall any discussions that there was an elevated ventilation requirement for these rooms.
But equally, we've taken you through the documentation, and there's no dispute that a generalised risk assessment was sent to Mott MacDonald saying these rooms are in critical care.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah. I would need to ask the technical team, but certainly my reflections, thoughts are that they looked at the room function and it was classified as a normal bedroom, and the clinical activities had been changed from critical care activities to normal bedroom activities. So there was a conscious change to go from a critical care to a normal bedroom activity for those 4 rooms.
So again, just so I'm understanding this, that your understanding of Malt MacDonald's position was, yes, there's a critical care area, but not all critical care areas would require the enhanced ventilation requirements.
Yes, sir. I don't know what Malt MacDonald's position is on it.
I'm talking about the time you worked for Malt MacDonald, so I'm not meaning to ascribe institutional your views to Malt MacDonald and vice versa.
Yeah, certainly that was all the discussions I'd ever had, was that they were generically talking about 20 multi-bedded rooms, and 14 of those were essential to be negative or balanced.
Whenever the IOM report came out, Mr McKechnie, he didn't agree with IOM's views in terms of the testing, did he?
I'm not sure if I was involved. I've seen subsequent correspondence to reflect that, but I'm not sure if I saw that at the time.
Okay. Well, again, you might not have seen it at the time, but just in fairness to you, if we could then look to Bundle 7, Volume 1 at page 308. Bundle 7, Volume 1, page 308. It's not an email you're copied into, Mr Greer, but it's from Stuart McKechnie of TUV Sud. If we just pick matters up at the third paragraph, Mr McKechnie states, post-tender and during construction stage, Infection Control indicated that they wished particular conditions for both these room types, which after extensive consultation and review were subject to change orders by NHSL to multiplex. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we look over the page onto page 309, there's various references to 10 air changes per hour, 10 PA, SHTMs, HBNs, and then HBN 23. And then after that, Mr McKechnie states, and can find no relevant guidance which correlates with what is now being asked for here. The only areas detailed with this level of ventilation and pressure are isolation rooms, which we already have in the area and which are serviced accordingly. However, the plus 10 PA for isolation rooms is maintained within the lobby area, not the room itself, which is balanced. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Then if we skip the next 2 paragraphs, Mr McKechnie states, our dilemma, therefore, is that statements are being made stating the rooms are not in accordance with SHTM 0301 without substantiation, which in our opinion, we cannot accept this as a basis for design. And then the final paragraph, however, we need clear and concise briefing as to what operating standards are required, and would categorically state that referencing SHTM 0301 does not, in our opinion, provide that. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, do we see once more 2 schools of thoughts in terms of how you interpret the guidance? You've got IOM Limited on the one hand, saying it has to be a particular pressure regime and a particular number of air changes, and then you've got Mr McKechnie on the other saying, no, it doesn't, that's not right, the design complies with the published guidance.
Yep.
And again, just perhaps drawing on your experience in both the private sector and the public sector, do you find it surprising that even at this late stage in proceedings, there's still this level of dubiety in relation to what the published guidance means?
Yeah, I think it potentially goes back to my point about the new SHTM 0301, I think, is clearer. And I think there was more room for interpretation in the old SHTM 0301. As I say, for me, if the room function had been defined differently and the clinical activities had been defined differently, I think there was I would imagine the Malt MacDonald team would have come to a different conclusion, which I think would differ to Stuart's opinion. But I say I'd probably leave that to mechanical engineers to decide that.
In the period that follows, the inquiry's heard evidence that effectively there's a further settlement agreement. So there's high value change notice 107, settlement agreement 2. Were Mott MacDonald involved in that process?
Yes.
What was Mott MacDonald's involvement?
It was effectively the same roles we've had through the construction phase. The scope didn't change. We had a project management team. I think that the individuals had changed. Camille had left Mott MacDonald by that point, and Kelly came back from maternity. So it was really Kelly and myself from a project management function, and then we carried on doing our reviews on the remedial works beyond that as well.
And in terms of the agreement that was captured in high value change notice 107, that's to change the ventilation parameters for critical care rooms from the balanced and negative 4 air changes per hour to positive pressure and 10 air changes per hour. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, in terms of that change, did Mott MacDonald undertake any design review or provide design or undertake design responsibility for that?
In terms of the high value change itself?
Yes.
I think we did review that high value change, yes.
But were Mott MacDonald taking design responsibility for the final solution?
No, I think we were asked to. I think my understanding of it was that written into SA2 was a requirement for various parties to provide design assurance, but I don't believe Mott MacDonald were consulted in that part of it, and it was something that Mott MacDonald couldn't offer at that point.
And again, is that consistent with really what you've told us the whole way through, that simply wasn't Mott MacDonald's role and they weren't going to take design responsibility at the end of the project?
Yeah, so there was I think there's two things. One was the kind of scope part of it. It wasn't part of our advisory service or project management services. And then the second part was that Project Co, again, for the remedial works, that was Imtech were doing the remedial works. I think Project Co employed them directly, and Horley were the designers. So if Project Co had their own design team, I'd say my thoughts are you can't have two sets of designers in the project, otherwise there'll be different design solutions presented. So one party had to be the designer, and Mott MacDonald with NSS and the John Rayner, the AE, were providing the reviews to support Project Co's design. Sorry.
No, please go on.
I was just going to say that I think that in this instance, in the remedial works, it was an option E contract. I think it moved to an NEC option E. So cost reimbursable, and there was a lot of pressure obviously on the project by that point, but commercial pressure wasn't one of them. And I think that certainly there was a distinct change in collaboration at that point between all the parties. I think that part of the process worked really well.
If I could just ask you to have in front of you, please, Bundle 3 at page 943. Bundle 3, page 943. And this is a document headed up, Response from Mott MacDonald, Technical Advisor, 4th of May 2020. Which I think is the text of an email from yourself to Brian Curry. Begins by saying, Brian, further to our previous discussions and your email dated 1st May 2020 requesting we provide an assurance statement for inclusion in SA2, our advisory services are inconsistent with providing a design assurance statement, and as such, I hope you can understand we are unable to do so. Any assurances regarding design compliance, if they're required between the board and Project Co, we believe should be provided by Project Co. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we skip towards the penultimate paragraph, you say, we cannot confirm that Project Co's design will meet the requirements of Part A without undertaking design, and we cannot be designer and client advisor at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we could look on to page 1433. I think you'd mentioned that there was some form of statement that was provided by Mott MacDonald. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
So is that what we see here, the document dated the 18th of May 2020 MML Advisory Services Statement?
Yeah, I think the basis of it was, I think, consistent with the email that you just had on the screen. It's the same kind of principles in terms of not being able to undertake the design or provide the design assurance, but we were able to comment, query and challenge the design.
So effectively a soft review, but without actually undertaking any design responsibility for what's included within High Value Change Notice 107.
Yeah, and I think from memory the NSS had a very similar response, and so did John Rain. I think all the three reviewing parties were the same. They were not exactly the same letters, but they all drafted individually, but the outcome was effectively the same. We challenged it, queried it, but couldn't actually take on the design responsibility itself.
So if we look to page 1433, which is a letter of the 18th of May 2020, second full paragraph, it states, we confirm in our capacity as Lothian Health Board's technical advisor, we've undertaken a review commensurate with the time and information made available to us of IHS Lothian Limited's design response to HVC 107 as detailed in the following documentation as it exists at the 13th of May 2020. There's then various documents set out. After the bullet points, it continues, in accordance with the findings of our advisory services note dated 18th May 2020, and without prejudice to advice previously provided to the Lothian Health Board, we consider that good progress has continued to be made by Project Co and Amtech, and we've received assurances from Project Co on many issues. Whilst there are ongoing issues to be resolved with the design team, including but not limited to the matters raised in our advisory services note, on the basis of those assurances, we have not identified significant red flags at this time, which, in our opinion, would prevent Project Co ultimately meeting the requirements of Part A of the scope subject to Project Co. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, quite a high-level review, simply stating, in terms of our review, there is no particular red flags identified.
Yeah, given the circumstances here, there was a lot more scrutiny on the project at that point. So, yeah, it was the principles were the same, albeit the focus. You can imagine the focus in the project at this point.
And then I think that's clarified over the page on page 1434. Where the letter continues, in making the above statements, we highlight there's not an acceptance on our part of any design liability. Project Co remains solely liable and responsible for their design and construction, meeting the requirements of Part A of the scope. We're not in a position to provide any design assurance, as we cannot be designer and client advisor at the same time. You see that? Yes. And that's effectively all consistent with what you set out in your earlier email to Brian Curry.
Yes, yeah.
Mr Greer, that concludes everything I want to ask you about the project itself. But obviously, given your experience, the fact that you've worked in the private sector and you now work for NHSL, I'd be interested just to ask you some questions about your views on a range of issues that have happened after the project, including the creation of NHS Scotland Assure. In your work, are you familiar with the body that's been created called NHS Scotland Assure?
Yes.
And just, again, explain in your own words, what do you understand NHS Scotland Assure is? So
NHS, I think probably from our work in the remedial works, that was probably the first almost incarnation of Assure. That was the NSS team undertaking reviews similar to the Mont MacDonald reviews on the remedial works. So NHS Scotland Assure were set up after that to undertake key stage assurance reviews. So a review at OBC, review at FBC, review at various points in the construction phase and through the commissioning.
And in terms of these key stage assurance reviews, now that you work for NHSL, have you had any experience of going through key stage assurance reviews?
Not we say that the project I was working on was the National Treatment Centre Lothian at St John's, and we were working towards our OBC KSAR when in December all capital projects, including NTC Lothian, was paused. So we never got to a formal OBC KSAR, but we did have really good engagement with the team. We instigated a pre-KSAR workshops, so that the design team presented over the four or five disciplines. They presented to the Assure team. I think they were well received. So yeah, it was the Assure team. It was Tracy Mitchell's the PM and Thomas Rogers the kind of the lead, and we had really good engagement with them. Bill Conley from a fire perspective.
Do you think the key stage assurance reviews are going to be a positive step for major hospital build projects? I
think they are. They will definitely help reduce the risk of errors, and I think the key there is they will reduce, but the reviews won't be able to. In my view, they can't eliminate the risk of errors. So I think the conversation to say that the processes are still early in their development, and I think there's part of it is we need to get the right balance between reducing the risk of errors versus the impact it's having in cost and programme, because I think that we've still as a group got learning to do about how we do that.
So do you think there's weaknesses in the key stage assurance reviews at the moment that could be improved upon?
Yeah, I mean there's easy wins in terms of there's a lot of duplication. So we've still got the NDAP process, National Design Assessment Process. We've got a new SDAC process, Sustainable Design and Construction, and we've got the KSAR process on top of that. And there's a lot of duplication between those three tasks, and I think we're all aware of that. It just creates extra time and money that at the minute we don't have to go through those three individual processes. I think the other thing is one of the concerns raised by the design team working on NTC was you sometimes get one set of reviewers at an OBC, and then, or certainly in our case, the pre-OBC KSAR, and then you'll get another set of reviewers at OBC, and then you'll get another set at FBC, which again, there's back to interpretation of guidance. I think other health boards have struggled with that, where they're getting inconsistent feedback and therefore changes to the design and construction. So,
in terms of NHS Scotland Assure, one of the other things that is as a centre of excellence is somewhere that health boards could go to get help with the interpretation of guidance. Do you see that as a positive step? Yes,
absolutely. And I've used certainly Bill Conley from a fire perspective. We've had good dialogue with Bill on the National Treatment Centre, and it's been very helpful.
And is that aspect of NHS Scotland Assure, is that any different to what HFS used to provide before it was created?
It's difficult for me to say. I didn't, in the previous role, I didn't really have direct engagement with the HFS on the NPD programme. That was more managed by the NHS team.
Thank you. If I could ask you to have in front of you bundle 9, please, page 4, which is the target operating model for what became NHS Scotland Assure. So bundle 9, page 4. And if we could look on to page 15, please. So you see a small table with what's new, or what the current state was, and then what the future was to be in terms of NHS Scotland Assure. In terms of the current state, you'll see the final point on page 15 is that I think an identified problem was silos between professions. Certainly in terms of your work in the RHCYP, did you think silos between professions was a problem?
As in between architecture and M&E and...
Perhaps between clinicians, estates, engineers?
No, I thought the NHS loading team was brilliant, to be honest. They worked. It was a really challenging project. Brian led the team brilliantly, and yeah, I didn't get that feeling from my perspective on it. No.
So from your perspective, that wasn't something that needed to be fixed?
No, not on Edinburgh project. No.
Okay. And if we look to some of the future states, some of the things that NHS Scotland Assure are to do, one is to jointly sign off documents on builds and major refurbishments at key stages in the life cycle. Is your understanding of a key stage assurance review that it is going to be joint sign off between NHS Scotland Assure and the Health Board?
That's not been my understanding to date. That's it. I'm not sure when this document was produced.
So this is an earlier document. So this was the target operating model, and then it got refined before NHS Scotland was set.
Yes. So no. So if that's so, the current state is not. That's not my understanding of the process. It's the Assure team. I say they do really valuable reviews, but they don't jointly sign off. They provide an audit report, recommendations, and then it's really up to the Health Board to then action those. And then the Health Board can't proceed to the next phase until they get the support from the KSAR team.
From a Health Board perspective, would it be a positive step if you had a Centre for Excellence that did jointly sign off these types of projects?
I think, well, certainly from a resource perspective, there are challenges just now to get the right resources on capital projects. There's a lack of available IPC, there's a lack of estates, so having a resource pool I think would be helpful. I guess I'd need to probably see the detail about what the joint sign-off would entail and how that would all work together. Because at the minute Assure, my understanding is Assure are very clear that it's well and almost is the board's responsibility. I think there's probably other complications in terms of the regulatory obligations on health boards to ensure the facilities are safe.
Do you think that's the right model, though, in terms of all of the liabilities still sitting with the Health Board if you have a Centre for Excellence?
Again, I think that's probably back to my point earlier. I think we really need a full rethink about this. So back to NPDs make that difficult. Even design and build could make that difficult as well. So we need, again, I think the whole procurement contract and delivery needs a full rethink in terms of how we want to, and I think probably potentially keep control of more of the risk. I would have thought going forward.
And again, I think it's quite clear that NHS Scotland Assure it's not going to be an inspector and it's not going to have a regulatory function for these projects. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think back to the point we were discussing earlier about the guidance. I think the key for me is getting an elevated status in the guidance, so we know which ones are the mandatory parts and which ones are the purely the guidance. I think that's, for me, that would be if we were to do anything right now, as opposed to that point you were making. I think refining the briefing documents, refining the guidance documents, so we've got a really good starting point for a project, as opposed to having all the interpretation that's currently there.
And do you think it would be simpler if there was just a mandatory legal standard that had to be complied with, as opposed to a document that is guidance that can be derogated from if the circumstances require?
It's difficult because every building is unique, and therefore I think there's probably elements of that could be, but trying to have one size fits all, that could be a challenge in healthcare.
Final document I'd ask you to have a look at, please, Mr Greer, is Bundle 1, and it begins at page 2263, which is the latest iteration of SHTM 0301. And I think I had you noted earlier as saying that you thought this is perhaps not perfect, but it's a vast improvement from the 2014 version. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you just explain what's better in the 2022 version as opposed to the 2014 version?
I think for particularly, I mean, focusing in on the critical care areas, they've defined the level of patient that would trigger that enhanced ventilation for a critical care area. So I think that starts to close the gap where before I think.
Sorry, my fault, Mr. Greer. Could you start your answer again?
Apologies. Yeah, so I think the new SHTM 0301 has defined critical care areas. So my understanding is that it now sets out the level of patient that would trigger the enhanced ventilation. Whereas the old SHTM didn't. It was just a table E1 as Appendix 1 table E1 that had the ventilation rate in it. Okay, thank you. And the formation of ventilation safety groups, I think, is a good initiative as well.
Okay. Well, if we could just look to that to page 2286. Just so we're talking about the same thing. At the bottom, 4.4, is this the multidisciplinary group referred to at paragraph 4.5?
Yes.
Why do you see that as an improvement?
I think it gives a route of escalation for ventilation related issues. And I think beyond this, Lothian have set up, it's still I understand it's still draft format just now, but they've set up an operational procedure for capital projects where we're looking to set up a project ventilation safety group, potentially also a site. So if you take my NTC project, you would have an NTC project ventilation safety group, you would have a St John's site safety group, and then you would have the broader Pan-Lothian safety group. So I think the initiative's good. The challenge is, back to my resource issue, there's simply not enough people to actually do that. And therefore, what tends to happen is you end up just going to the Pan-Lothian because in the minute we don't have the resources to set up the local ones or the project ones.
And in terms of derogations would now have to be done through the ventilation safety group. But is there a standard form? If you're doing a project and you think that you need to derogate from guidance, you would do it through the ventilation safety group. Is there a standard form that would be filled in so that there's a uniform way that derogations are done in every project in Scotland?
No.
Do you think that would be a positive step if there was?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so we, on the NTC, again, along with the iPavilion project, we've developed similar. We've developed a room data sheet, development of a room data sheet process that we've shared with Assure to get their buy-in to that development process, and similar on the derogation. So we've pushed flow charts and process diagrams for how we see the derogation process working, and we've also done that from there's another one as well, can't remember right now, but yeah, we've done a number of initiatives that we're trying to standardise the documents so that there's a standard template to work off and get Assure's buy-in to that template.
A number of witnesses that have given evidence to the inquiry have suggested that standardisation in this area, so that different health boards aren't going off doing their own things, standardisation would be a massive improvement. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, for me, it would just given the pressure on resources just now delivering these projects, I think any standardisation where we've got set templates, I think the big one for me is the briefing documents. Having so with the board's construction requirements we've spoken about a lot here, that there isn't a standard template for framework projects and how briefing should work. So we've currently set up an initiative in the Scottish Property Advisory Group to develop that, a standard approach to briefing.
Sorry, a standard approach to
briefing documents.
briefing.
Yeah, so likes of the board's construction requirements. So there's no template document that you can use. I think for an NEC framework project, there isn't a template document you can call upon. The most recent was probably the SFT document that was done for NPD projects, but that's not appropriate for an NEC contract. So we're working on trying to create a new template for those, and even lights of clinical output specs, which another document. There isn't a standard. This is the best template for clinical output specs or non-clinical output specs. Every project we start from scratch.
In terms of your reflections, I think, on the project in particular and how perhaps these types of projects could be done better in the future, we've covered a number of issues, but you've always had a long time to think about this project. Do you have any other issues that you'd want to raise in terms of how you think these types of projects could be done better in the future?
I think I've probably covered most of the points. For me, it's a full review back to what is the ideal contract, what is the best contract and procurement setup for these projects, and start from there, as opposed to having to go down a PFI type model, which in the current environment of healthcare, I'm not sure if that's the right route to go. So I think a full review is needed.
Thank you. Final few points I want to ask you about, Mr Greer, just in relation to the second statement that you provided to the inquiry. Again, we've covered your qualifications at the start, but you're a civil engineer, is that right?
Yes.
And you reviewed the report that was produced by the building services engineer, Mr Maddox, is that right?
Yes.
I take it the inquiry should understand that because you're not a qualified building services engineer, you're not really looking to take issue with any of the opinions that are offered by Mr Maddox in his report.
Absolutely not, no.
And again, you cover your understanding of a lot of documentation and what contracts mean within that statement. Should the inquiry understand that you're doing that to helpfully try and provide your own personal views, but you're not trying to offer an expert legal opinion on what the correct contractual interpretation is?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr Greer. I don't have any further questions at the moment, but Lord Brodie may have questions. There may be some questions from court participants, but thank you for answering my questions today.
Thank you.
Really just, it's a problem with my noting as much as anything else. You were asked some questions about NHS Scotland Assure, and you mentioned the duplication of the number of forms of review that are now current, and it really just was to make sure that I'd got a note of them, because I think there was maybe one or possibly two acronyms that I missed. You mentioned the NDAP process. As I understand it, one of the innovations of associated with NHS Scotland Assure is the introduction of the key stage review process. Now, I think you also mentioned either one or two other processes which I just missed.
Sorry, the third one was the SDAC process, which is the Sustainable Design and Construction process. There's a new guidance document which has been produced by NHS Scotland Assure that new projects need to follow relating to SDAC.
Right, so if I pursue that under reference to sustainable design and construction.
Yeah, I can't remember
process.
I can't remember the code right now, but I'm happy to share the code afterwards. Of that, there's an SHPN, I think it is, which sets it out. But as I can happy to share it later.
Thank you. Now, again, should we take 10 or 15 minutes to check?
I think if we could possibly take 15 minutes, it's just one of the core participants, council, is dialing in remotely. So I think 15 minutes would be helpful.
Very well. Mr Greer, I'll ask you to wait for maybe another 10 or 15 minutes in the witness room just to check if there's any other questions that rise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please stand. Please stand.
Mr Greer.
There's no further matters arising, my lord.
Yes, please. No more questions, Mr Greer, and that means you're free to go. But before you do go, can I just express my thanks on behalf of the inquiry for your help? I mean, you've come twice to give evidence. You've provided three statements. I'm very conscious that provision of these statements takes a lot of time and requires looking at documents and finding documents. There's a lot of work in that. So can I just say thank you for that? And as I say, you're now free to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Now, we should be able to begin again tomorrow.
Yes, it'll be Mr Hall and Mr Pike tomorrow, and it will be Mr McClelland asking the questions, my lord.
Right. Very well. Well, can I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and all being well, we'll see each other tomorrow morning at 10.